Fashion Anthropology, Fashion Jinrugaku, l'anthropologie de la mode. Je suis Tiffany Godoy. On Fashion Anthropology, we deep dive into the movements and minds shaping fashion culture today. From street to luxe, Shanghai to Paris, underground to legendary. Slam Jam, connector, patron, platform, movement, attitude. Slam Jam. Where would we or Slam Jam be without collaborations? Whether it's making stuff together, distributing it, managing production, true to their slogan, Slam Jam's always connecting tribes of like-minded people across the world. Sekai no kokorozashi o onajiku suru hitobito no buzoku o tsunagu. From that lineup, we talk to Telfar Clemens of Telfar, Giorgio Di Salvo of United Standard, and we start with legend Fraser Cooke of Nike.
Fraser Cooke of Nike.
Nike is a longtime Slam Jam collaborator, most recently with the Nike Blazer Class 77. Fraser is a streetwear OG that's instrumental in creating Nike's collaborations with Comme des Garçons, Kim Jones, and Riccardo Tisci, to name a few. Fashion Anthropology. Episode 2. Tribe members and collaborators.
Fashion Anthropology.
Épisode 2. Les membres de la tribu et les collaborations.
Fraser Cooke.
Okay, so we're doing a podcast on the 30 years of Slam Jam, and my take is really about how Europe has put its spin on what we call street culture, whatever that means now, you know?
Yeah.
And I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of context about like how things have rolled out, you know, since you started, and just to give us like an OG perspective.
I'm thinking about the sort of timing. It was probably 1989. But personally, I was like cutting hair, but I was into the early streetwear, really, like Stussy, and then a couple of sort of things that started to sort of pop up, like, you know, Fresh Jive and all this kind of stuff. In fact, that was even after. So like 89, there was really like Stussy. And then people were looking at, I guess the only information that they had was looking at like record covers, like, and primarily hip hop, you know, so you're looking at what people are wearing.
Stussy was founded in the early 1980s by Sean Stussy. The company embodied the surfwear trend out of Orange County, California, and transcended it.
You couldn't really get that stuff like in England. It's like hard to imagine now that, you know, it was so sort of exotic, like things were from like New York or LA, or, you know, in London you already had like what people would call like street fashion, but that was more like people mixing and matching things, you know, like taking stuff that didn't make sense. So people, the whole Buffalo, you know, MA1s and putting badges on them, and, you know, workwear and fucked up Levi's and work, you know, different stuff like
and
that.
Even like vintage Chanel.
Or vintage stuff, yeah, all being mixed up. So that would be the stuff that we were looking at, and I know that someone like Luca would have been looking at the same stuff at the same time, but he was sitting in Italy, which is an even more conservative, I mean, even still to this day, by comparison, like backwards compared to somewhere like London, which, you know, embraced that stuff pretty quickly and was more of a, you know, on the circuit between like New York, London, you know, Tokyo. So I'd been getting into that stuff initially through seeing it in skate magazines, and then I was cutting hair. And one of the guys whose hair I used to cut had a store across the street from the salon where I worked. He sort of said to me, oh, you know, why don't you come and sort of work for me? Because I was, funny enough, very friendly with Carl Templer at the time, because we sort of grew up close to each other, and we met each other when we were about 18. Or I was 18 and he was like 17 or 16, I don't know. He was a window dresser, and he started doing stuff for the face, I think, already then. He was starting to do like little sections, like the hype section, like, you know, put in cool stuff that, you know, would now be the old equivalent of like almost like a hypebeast, you know, where you're just looking at items like this is the hot thing, except you had to wait a month each time for the magazine to come out, almost either laid flat, white background, or, you know, sometimes some kind of little photo shoot, you know. But anyway, so I went to work with this guy. I was getting bored of cutting hair, so I was like, great. And he was like, you can go to New York like with me once a month, and we'll go and get this stuff. So, like I say, it was over there. It wasn't here. There weren't distributors.
Carl Templer is a British-born, New York-based fashion stylist, creative director, and powerhouse. The Face magazine shaped fashion and music culture out of London from 1980 through the early 2000s. It's just been relaunched.
And so I went over to work in this store.
What was it called?
Passenger. Because, as I say, people have been looking at these like record covers, and that music had started to blow up at that point, you know. It would have been like Public Enemy time, you know, that kind of thing. De La Soul, Public Enemy, that early wave that started to get big, like Def Jam had got big, and, you know, Tommy Boy and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, we were trying to buy that American kind of, I guess, sportswear, really, you know, like starter jackets and, you know, New Era hats, and, you know, but it would have been just regular teams like LA Lakers or, you know, New York Yankees or whatever. So I know Duffer had been doing a bit of that, and they were also buying the vintage sneakers as well, which at the time hadn't happened. Like Adidas or Nike, any of those guys hadn't thought we're going to reissue anything. This was just like old stuff that people wanted to get, the old Run DMC shell toes, so, you know, superstars. So people have started to find dead stocks that were already like not interesting to people in New York or wherever, where it was just sitting there. So I went to work for this guy, going to buy all that sort of stuff, really, because I had a knowledge of it. So he you know, or had an interest in it, and he was like, well, you'll pick the right stuff, and I've got the connection. So we went over to New York, and as I say, we brought it back to the store. You know, you could pick up a pair of superstars for like $19 at Dr. J's in Brooklyn on closeout or something. So we just bought the whole lot and just shipped them back. And so Luca Benini was a wholesale customer, because Passenger used to make a little bit of their own stuff. It was a little bit, because it was 89, so it was like rave stuff a little bit. So it was like sort of baggy, sort of sweatshirty, sort of pastel-y, you know, with graphics and stuff like that. We were making there. So he came from Italy, but I remember meeting him, and I remember he bought some bits and bobs from us and took it back to Italy. He subsequently, you know, as I got to know him in years, you know, after that, told me he used to like drive a van over, and there was like, we were like kind of next door to Lonsdale, which is like Everlast for England, you know, like boxing gear. And it was a kind of another one of those like street adopted things. So like a Lonsdale t-shirt was kind of cool. So I know he was buying some of that stuff and just putting it in a van and driving it back, you know, somehow taking the ferry, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, because you couldn't, there was no tunnel then, I don't think, at the time. There's no Eurostar. You know, London was still, as I say, quite happening, and, you know, it wasn't like just related to today. It was very few people. It was very tiny, but it was still like enough of a scene. But I get the sense that Luca must have been very on his own in Italy, like really looking at that stuff from abroad. But I don't think there would have been like, you know, so many people. I mean, he was in Ferrara, but even if he was going to Milan, it wasn't, you know, anything like a scale of, it's not the same.
Yeah, it was a different language, I think.
Exactly. And also Italy has that, still to this day, you know, much more the traditional fashion, you know, I mean, they've got such a sort of a heritage in their own brands and making things, and although that boutique culture around the country where, you know, they stock all those, you know, it's like quite an impenetrable, quite a conservative, you know, slow moving way of doing stuff.
Italy has that much more the traditional fashion. They've got such a sort of a heritage in their own brands and making things. And, you know, it's like quite an impenetrable, quite a conservative, you know, slow moving way of doing stuff.
So yeah, that's how I met him. And I think that what was quite interesting was that after working there for a while, that lasted for about a year, and then I had to sort of go back to do a bit of hairdressing. But in going to New York, I'd got friendly with, as I say, the next wave of people after Stussy. So one of them was like this label called Pervert, and I started to, you know, got friendly with the guy that did it. He gave me a few t-shirts to like just have. I gave them to Carl that was doing the thing, because he was like, oh, you seen any new stuff? He put it in the magazine, put my phone number. Suddenly people calling me like, you know, can we buy it for the store in England? So I became like a distributor not by any design, like not aiming to do it, you know. But then I realized that it could sort of help fund my desire to like go back to the US, and I think at the time I wanted to live there, but it would at least get me to, you know, I had an excuse that I could go there and gradually start to meet people and start to buy into this stuff. And again, Luca was sort of doing a similar thing at a parallel time, although I think that he already knew what he wanted to do, so it was like quite, you know, more structured the way that he went about it. You know, he He definitely wanted to have a company that was doing stuff. So it's a couple of years later, like 91, 92, the action sports retailer show that used to be in San Diego that was primarily surf and skateboard industry, and even like bikinis and, you know, like it was very surf skate at the San Diego Convention Center. That was on twice a year. The streetwear brands started to show there because they were really a spin-off and of the skate.
So like what kind of brands?
Well, like Stussy, Fresh Jive, Draws, Carhartt. I'm trying to think of all the names. There's so many of them. Pervert. A lot of kids from like New York, us. And what I was going to say is there was the only other people from Europe that were there that we really saw was like this guy Luca and a couple of his friends. Do you know what I mean? So there was Michael at that time. That Gimme 5 had existed. Gimme 5 was doing Stussy. Michael himself was like part of the original like Stussy tribe.
Michael Kopelman founded the London boutique and distributor Gimme 5. He was a pioneer introducing Japanese brands from the Urahara scene to the West in the 1990s.
And I remember somehow we were all staying at a hotel and we ended up getting friendly with like Luca, Giorgio Dimitri, who was like doing like he was doing like a sport and street magazine or something. You know that thing that I think it still exists.
Cool, yeah.
So he was doing something with that, and he was also doing these like dance music DMC magazine for the like Disco Mix Club or whatever it was called. So there were these guys that sort of had similar interests, but they were from Italy and they were just the most on it, you know, and we were on it in our way. And I think they were quite intrigued with us and we were sort of intrigued with them and we got along with them. And I remember we just had this one dinner and then we suddenly and Luca at that time was just also becoming the guy for Stussy in Italy and subsequently beyond Italy. But I think he was so sort of early to switch on to that. I mean, he was really worlds apart from people around him, whereas in England there was me and there was Michael and there was Slam City Skates, and it was like Russell Waterman, who went on to do like Silas and these brands, and Sophia Pantera, who does Aries Rising and all that stuff now. We all had a natural affinity and saw things the right way because I think that we were coming from being, you know, culturally into it. So for us, it wasn't like business first. It was like we maybe naively, I don't know if it's stupid or not, but we believed it was some sort of like meaningful cultural thing, that the clothing was a sort of expression of what you believed in, like musically or sort of philosophically or whatever.
So for us, it wasn't like business first. It was like we believed it was some sort of like meaningful cultural thing, that the clothing was a sort of expression of what you believed in, like musically or sort of philosophically or whatever.
And I know that like Lucas shared that sort of thing. So it was a tribe of sorts, do you know what I mean? Versus people that are kind of like distributors, like, oh, this thing's hot, I can see the kids are into that, so I'm going to go and grab that stuff, but have no real authenticity. I think at the time, the people that ran those brands kind of wanted to work with someone who understood them, not just to scale up or whatever. So through that sort of like core love of whatever ultimately is behind, you know, music, you know, a kind of ethos and way of thinking of streetwear, and coming from a similar sort of influences. So I know Luca was sort of into punk, and then, you know, hip hop stuff that came after that, and dance music, and we were all the same. So it was just a very natural thing. But I think actually it's funny because outside of like a core of few people in sort of New York and LA, even in the US, like really was quite behind as well.
Behind in the way that kind of that clothing was interpreted, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that we took it, because we're in Europe maybe, was we mixed it a little bit more into the high fashion as well. You know, I remember when I went to LA in 89 again, and I had like this Stussy tribe jacket and all this tees and stuff like that. My friend that I stayed with, who was, you know, connected and in the scene, you know, they didn't see it as in the same.
It was more of a lifestyle.
Yeah, it was more like you're part of that sort of like beachy kind of like lifestyle. New York, it changed a little bit because like Sean was intersecting with like Paul, and he introduced him to Jules and DJs that were playing clubs that were hot then, so it became much more urban, which is where the exchange was between like the London New York thing is more similar. But I think that, you know, the London side of it sort of elevated it and Luca would have been doing the same sort of thing. I think that the way that Michael controlled it became very like kind of perceived to be hard to get, because he wouldn't sell to everybody. He would only sell it in the right place. The items were quite scarce, and the people that we all knew that you were either giving it to or kind of, you know, because a lot of people would swing by like Gimme 5 showroom, and it was, you know, it was good people. I mean, it was people that were like quite prominent in like subculture.
Sean is, of course, founder and former Stussy creative director. Paul Middleman is post-Sean Stussy creative director and ex-director at Adidas and Converse. Jules Gateson, original Stussy Tribe member, DJ, and designer at Herschel Supply Company. Yeah, so a lot of artists, right?
Yeah.
People that are creating culture.
Exactly. People that are actually forging the culture rather than looking at it, you know? From a London perspective, which I can talk about much better, like, we saw it as like, with as much sort of value, or for us more value than like high fashion stuff, you know, because it didn't necessarily speak to us, and it wasn't about just having something like well made and, you know, sort of elevated through exclusivity and price, you know what I mean?
It's about what it symbolized, right? It symbolized a new attitude. It symbolized...
Yeah, it's like, at the time, it's like, you must be into the sort of stuff I'm into. But there wasn't there was no social media. There was no, like, what you were wearing, like, really had to say a lot. And again, I think that was different because from even the places that some of this stuff was coming out of. So California, where Stussy was based, I mean, you can't wear as many, you know, it's like people are in cars, like they're not in the same social interaction sort of situation as you are in those other cities, where kind of what you wear means a lot, it says a lot, you know what I mean? But I do find it very intriguing, you know, that Luca was able to see all this stuff, because really it does take another level of mania in a way to be from where he was sitting, because, you know, I don't think even their media, I mean, they had some good magazines that was kind of fashion and street, like Père Louis was really good in the 80s that mixed that stuff up. But also I think that he was able to corner a market very early and did really, really well. Business-wise, I think that he was a little bit on his own, whereas in the UK you were competing with more stuff anyway. And you look at the way he's grown that business over the years, it's much bigger scale than what anyone's done with that sort of stuff in London. And so he's probably like been highly instrumental in transforming, like, you know, the way people dress in Italy and parts of Southern Europe. Do you know what I mean? Like even Spain and places like that he would have probably been sort of like servicing those guys as well.
At the time, it's like, you must be into the sort of stuff I'm into. But there was no social media, there was no, like, what you were wearing, like, really had to say a lot.
What was the Stussy Tribe? You just DJ'd at a Stussy party, or is that tonight?
That was last night. Well, I think the original Stussy Tribe was, as I say, it was like Sean and Paul Middleman. Paul helped Sean get he was helping him out at the beginning, and they literally, you know, like a couple of rails of staff, and they went to like Patricia Field and sold it to her, and they were doing like the Javits Center in New York, like the menswear show or something like that, a little table. And you know, Paul was in the clubs in New York, so Sean came from California. I think Paul's dad was in the rag trade and sort of like helped him. So Paul was like the kid just saying, oh, meet DJ Jules, like he's like playing at Nell's or whatever. And, you know, it was, or meet, you know, this guy from London, James Le Bon, who's like this famous hairdresser who's now like a sort of filmmaker, you know, at NYU, and brothers Mark Le Bon that did ID and all that. So Sean was kind of like linking with people that were inspiring him, because, you know, all the early tees were inspired by like either sort of reggae, hip hop, and actually fashion in a funny way from the 80s, because some of his stuff was like Romeo Gilly, kind of like Com, Yoji, you know, he was taking sort of shirts and sort of pants that they would do, but then turn it into like a beach pant or like a shirt that was like a Pendleton mixed with, you know. So there was, it's funny enough, it's almost full circle actually if you think about it, because it wasn't like he was completely oblivious to that. He had enough kind of like sophistication. And that stuff was, you know, in the 80s, there was that moment where some of those brands, it was like, I remember like Com and Yoji were like very, very like the cool thing to wear if you were sort of in the centre of London or in New York. And going to clubs and kind of in that creative scene, I guess. So he was doing a street slant on that.
And I think, like if you think about Com and Yoji, those are equally, like, you can tell it's Com and Yoji, just like you could tell a Stussy shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's this like kind of visual language.
I mean, he was stealing like the, borrowing, inspired by, Chanel logos with the double S and stuff like that, which again was like hip-hop influence, right? Because that was all aspirational, like the Dapper Dan. They had that Louis Vuitton thing, which was like they got sued for, which was just an appropriation of the LV. They made like bucket hats and shirts and everything, right? But the tribe, I think, was, a bunch of sort of like-minded people. It was DJs or skaters or creative people. Not many of them. I think they just, Sean just sent them boxes of clothes. It was just seeding stuff. But then he started to do the varsity jacket thing where he put their name on it.
The varsity was a one-of-a-kind jacket featuring personalized embroidery on the breast pocket and laid the groundwork for the IST, International Stussy Tribe. Originally created for only the closest members of the tribe that Sean met on his travels.
So, there was the London crew, there was the New York crew, there was the Tokyo crew, which was like Hiroshi and Kan from, Kan Takagi. It was really like, we're part of the gang. It was almost like a Hell's Angels thing, like the jacket, that bonded you together as a gang, and they just put the name on it. And then now, that was quite attractive for people that were trying to sort of find an identity against that brand. So people said, I want to be part of the Stussy, or I feel like I'm part of that tribe.
It was really like, we're part of the gang. It was almost like a Hell's Angels thing, like the jacket, that bonded you together as a gang, and they just put the name on it.
By the way, Luca, through events like in Italy, where it was like, Stussy Tribe, and he would invite certain people and then bring certain DJs or, people that he wanted to sort of have that wouldn't normally have played, in Italy. So yeah, all of that just helped reinforce that this thing is a thing, like with a point of view and a taste level, and it's like you wanted to be part of it if that's what got you excited.
And how do you see Slam Jam's role now?
I mean, Slam Jam got quite big, he diversified, I think Stussy was very much the core of what he was doing at the beginning, and probably something that he felt a real strong personal passion for. But, Luca's found other brands, some more commercial. He helped to a certain extent with like Carhartt in Europe. I just think he's always open and interested in what the youthful, exciting, new people are doing. A lot of people just get to the point where they don't care anymore, or they're just like, they leave it to somebody else, or they're just like, I'm done with that. I like what I like. And I don't think it's, Luca's not the guy that wants to be out in the club at like 3 a.m, sort of with the kids. But he's very excited. I remember when he met Matthew, he got very, very excited. He's very, very passionate. He really believed in him. And that was before, they did Alyx. It was just like, I like Matthew, and he kept talking about him. And I've seen him do that over the years. I just think he's very, very, he's got a team of people around him, a loyal team. A lot of them have been there for a long time. And he clearly listens to them. But also he doesn't like phone it in, he shows up and he's there, and I think he has the natural, like really strong radar that he can sense whether something's right or is real. Maybe it's not even what he wants to wear, or, but he can feel that it makes sense within his Slam Jam universe.
Can you tell me about what you do?
Yeah, I work for Nike on product collaborations, basically. So in a very similar capacity to what I just said about like Luca or Michael, I'm still interested in what's going on. I still want to be there to not get secondhand information. I want to see and feel stuff, to find like-minded and passionate people that we can work with against, strategic objective. Yeah, I just sort of tend to be, building, I think, genuine relationships with people, and keep a curiosity and a proximity to areas that and individuals and scenes that can make sense culturally to Nike beyond like pure sport.
I just sort of tend to be building, I think, genuine relationships with people, keep a curiosity and a proximity to individuals and scenes that can make sense culturally to Nike beyond, pure sport.
Like Matthew, for example. Maybe it's better to give an example of something. You know, I met him. I think initially we were in Beijing. No, Shanghai. There was a store opening. I think back then he was doing the Bin Trill thing with Virgil and Heron. Heron had been working with us anyway. And then we started to see each other in other places. Like I was in LA at the time living for a bit. I was DJing, they were DJing. No Wave Radio, they were doing it, I was doing it. I'd be up there, I'd see them there. This is how these things typically happen.
Williams co-founded streetwear brand Bin Trill with a collective that included creative directors such as Heron Preston and Virgil Abloh.
But yeah, my job is to be part of the team that's sort of like are the go-to people, so that, you know, the people we work with don't want to be talking to like 55 different people, because when you're in an organization that big, you need somebody that they can be comfortable with, that understands the world that they're from, but also understands very well what we need to get done at the company. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I really feel like, you know, whether you talk about Slam Jam or Gimme Five or, you know, Viz Vim and Slam Jam, or it's really about relationships, no?
Yes, yeah, it's 100% about that. Interestingly, you know, when I first started, we didn't work with people that would have been really what we now class as kind of like fashion, I guess, very much. We worked probably with the people that would be on the periphery of, or within the sort of street culture or even streetwear culture. So if you're working with people like Stash or Futura, like back in the days, you know, they were doing t-shirt lines, they were part of that. There was actually quite a strong sort of like street art or art art component when I started. There hadn't been that convergence in the same way of like fashion and street, where it became the sort of the prevailing, most interesting, it seems like the most interesting component for youth now. You know what I mean? There's so many more people like either looking at or come into these fashion weeks that wouldn't have been looking at something else back then. So we're also sort of moving with what naturally, culturally makes sense.
Right. It's like whether that's music or sneakers or whatever. That's
Exactly.
So what's your official title?
Global Influencer Marketing Special Projects Senior Director.
Another member of the tribe at the center of what's happening in Milan is Giorgio Di Salvo of United Standard. Fashion Anthropology. United Standard is part functional clothing, part cultural projects and music. It made its runway debut at Milan's Fall-Winter 19 Fashion Week.
Antropologia della moda su HYPEBEAST Radio. I'm Giorgio Di Salvo, and I'm the creative director of United Standard, but I'm a kind of designer. I mean, I'm mostly a graphic designer. I've always been into clothing and stuff since I was a kid.
So when you started United Standard, what did you have in mind? What does that mean to you?
The story behind United Standard, it's kind of like complicated. In the last 5 years, I used to be the art director of the graphic part of the collection of Marcelo Burlon. And this thing was like obviously something really important in my life, like completely game changer, but really, really intense. And so this thing was like something that made my mind in a kind of like stop mode for the other projects.
Marcelo Burlon, Country of Milan, is a label by DJ, fashion designer, stylist, PR specialist, and founder Marcelo Burlon. The brand takes inspiration from Argentina's Patagonia region and 90s club culture. It kicked off the luxury street, personality-driven fashion category.
So at one point I decided, I was like, yeah, I have to do something that is like more me. I want to do something that it's mine. And because I was working in a really like close relationship with Marcel, of course, but even all the team behind, and it was like the first years of Off-White and Oud Bayer in that years were a part of the same company, like New Guards and blah blah. And it was like supernatural to make something with them. So United Standard, like the first collection was basically only about accessories, like bags, backpacks, and all this kind of stuff. We made a couple of collection together that wasn't really good in terms of business.
Newgards Group is an Italian contemporary luxury fashion production and distribution company. It was co-founded in Milan in 2015 by Claudio Antonioli, David Di Giglio, and Marcello Burlon. So, with such sharp partners, why wasn't it good business? Was it all made in Italy?
Yeah. So at the end, like the prices were like super crazy expensive. Even my approach on the project at the beginning was like super deep into materials, like crazy materials, carbon fiber, Kevlar fiber, like composite fabric. I mean, like the collection was super good, super cool, I think, but at the end not very commerciable. So at one point we decided to split. I mean, we still have a super good relation, and I put together like a new sample set, but really like, I don't know, it was like 10 pieces, nothing, and like two bags, I don't know, 4 bags. And I asked to Luca Benini through Gabri, that always been a super supporter of my job, to do this thing like together, this like United Standard together with the Slam Jam support. And I'm in touch with them like since, I don't know, like 15 years. I mean, I always work with them, with Stussy, through them. We always like being in the same thing, in the same culture, in the same thing. And they say, yes, let's do it, let's try. So we did like the first collection kind of like randomly. We sold good. It was like a good response from the shops. It was like good vibe in general. So we decided to go ahead. And yeah, the second collection was like a little bit bigger and blah blah blah. So and now I'm still working with them, and it's super cool, and it's going well.
You talked about being in the same kind of culture and scene about 15 years ago. What was that like?
I think that like me and Luca in different years, we had the same experiences, and this is the thing that I want to tell. I'm still a super like supporter of the underground scene of my city, of Italy, and in general. I think that where the fresh ideas came out, like from the streets, from the kids, from the people who hasn't, I mean, nothing to lose.
I'm still a super like supporter of the underground scene. I think that where the fresh ideas came out, like from the streets, from the kids, from the people who hasn't, I mean, nothing to lose.
All the cultural things behind the brand, it's at the end the most interesting part. Like as we were talking about like the Vuitton show that we just saw.
I think it's a time of culture, right? And I think, even street in general, whether you talk about like the scene in Japan, or it is about these like-minded individuals, right? And it is about this idea of family, extended family, and support. And that's where the collaborations come from, and kind of giving everyone an opportunity to connect.
This is one of the other things that I love. I mean, and this is what I try to explain in my first fashion show in Milan last week. The idea of community and the idea in general of collaboration. I mean, I think that the best things came out from the collaborations.
United Standard's fall-winter show in Milan, Factory Progresso, featured collaborations with Virgil Abloh and 26 other underground artists, designers, and musicians.
It was probably the first time that someone made something like who brought like people from like underground scene, like from like behind scenes, into the official circle. I mean, even because in Italy it's different for sure from like the New York, but it's different even from Paris, because like Milan and Italy in general is still like close. I think that at the end it was like a nice show. Like I think the most interesting thing was like all the people were like, there is a super good energy friends. We know, everybody know each other, and all the new people like from the official world are welcome. And I hope that it will be a good platform like United Standard to make like new collaboration between like the official world and like our world. I hope that it will be a good platform like United Standard to make like new collaboration between like the official world and like our world.
Being a designer in Italy, you have the level and the quality and the references, whether that's, you know, the artwork around you or just the execution of beautiful clothes and know-how. How does that affect your line and the way you approach making even a t-shirt or a sneaker?
In one side there is in Italy there is like this manufacture culture, so you can easily make a t-shirt, a shirt, or whatever you want. Not easily, but like you can do it. But at the same time, we don't have the culture about like the street culture is not as you can like define on Wikipedia. When you think about Italian clothes, you think about, I don't know, probably pitti kind of like approach. So like super tailored. And so this is one of my challenge. The challenge is to make something that it's global now, but obviously has some roots in like US, UK, and like bring these roots into Italian culture, and for me into Italian underground culture. It's not that easy. In this day, I'm super angry with this specific journalist who wrote a thing about my first show. It was like super negative. But what I didn't like about what he wrote is that I think that the point when you talk about streetwear or something about this kind of culture, you can talk about this without talk about what it represents. So it's not just about design and that's it. It's design, but it's even culture. So there is something on the back. This kind of culture, you can talk about this without talk about what it represents. So it's not just about design and that's it. It's design, but it's even culture. So there is something on the back.
It's about getting emotional. It's like making some kind of connection. You have like making an emotional connection. Like when you talk about music or culture or skate, that's like, you know, there's icons in there, there's stories in there, it's something that everyone can do and take part in.
Yeah, exactly. Again, sorry, I talk a lot about Virgil, but because like it's obviously one of the most, I think, important person. I think that the most wonderful message, and I was like crying after the first Louis fashion show when I was reading the post on Instagram. At the end he wrote, "Even you can do it." So this is, I think, a wonderful message. If you have an idea, you can do it. And how you can be against this concept.
On the other side of the Atlantic, Telfar Clemens of Telfar.
My name is Telfar Clemens of Telfar.
The New York-based designer is new to the Slam Jam tribe and has all of Luca Benini's favorite elements. Telfar spins Americana, music, and New York's underground scene into a frenzy-filled package.
I am on fashion anthropology, rocking the mic.
Speaking of microphones and sound systems, I mean, music is a major part of your culture, in your clothing culture and what you make.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I can say that I'm blessed to not have had to do anything that I'm not interested in doing. You know, kind of like making clothes would basically be possible because I would DJ a party or a few parties, or like DJ the entire week to like make the money that I used on, you know, the clothes. So also too, just having help from people within the community of nightlife and the art world. I think like that's truly like what helped me. It wasn't like the fashion industry.
Telfar presentations are something of New York Fashion Week lore. He's shown at White Castle, the fast food restaurant, in Times Square, and in 2017, he took over discount retail store Century 21 for a jam-packed event with the coolest downtown kids. You were around before HYPEBEAST, so when was Telfar founded exactly?
Well, I mean, I officially started the line in 2005. I made my first collection out of fabric and, you know, did a runway show and things like that. But I've been designing this line since I was 15. You know, even up till now, it's formalizing itself in terms of like becoming what a business is and, you know, doing things the fashion industry way or standard. But we also have to do things differently because we're not a traditional fashion company, I would say. It's like I didn't go to fashion school. I went to business school at Pace University. I wanted to be an accountant. And I knew that I wanted to have a clothing line because it's like this summer, pretty much before I even started college, I was like hustling around and figuring out if I actually wanted to go to school. And I think I actually started to sell clothes that summer. You know, I was just like selling them on the street, on Mulberry Street. And it was just like these T-shirts that I had inherited from like this like clothing company I was working for. So I just like...
You upcycled those babes.
I remixed them and, you know, immediately like started to reach out to stores and things like that. And some consignment stores took it on and people bought stuff on the street. And I was like, I guess I'll go to school, but I'm not going to stop doing this. So what I did is that I went to school super early in the morning at 6 a.m. I would take the early bird courses. And then by noon, I was doing whatever I needed to do for the line. And then around like 9 p.m., I was DJing. And I would go home around like 4 and go to school at 6. So it was like this whole cycle of work.
Telfar is, in Clemens' own words, a horizontal, democratic, universal label making gender-free clothes. The tagline is, "It's not for you, it's for everybody." The Telfar world is populated with major culture creators, Dev Hynes, Radboy, Sella Marley, and others. The Telfar world is really populated by people that are creating this all sorts of culture in New York. Can you talk about...
It's kind of like, you know, a lot of my friends just from day one before is like, oh, what do you do? Or, you know, things like that. It's like they were just doing cool things that were unique. And it's just like really cool to understand their talents and capabilities and ask them to actually contribute to what I'm doing because it just actually makes that better, you know? Because sometimes they're part of the inspiration. Sometimes they're do something really well that would add something different to this experience that I'm creating with clothes that was just taken out of that context, you know?
The last collections have been very, I mean, they're performance oriented. Mm-hmm. Like when you've done things in restaurants or even department stores. Can you talk a little bit about that process of where you start and you know, is it the clothing or is it like a person or is it a place or...
It's an experience for that I personally had, and just like my experiences are like, it would be probably, you know, 100 times more imaginative than whatever the place could be, because it's just like I know what happened there, and like kind of you gauge your position and having your stuff in this aspirational place in terms of like what we did at Century 21, you know, and what we did with like White Castle, you know. So it's like really like, what is my version of that? And my version of that seems to be like a pretty good fit for a lot of things, you know. So, you know, that's really where it starts. It's like, what is that company, or what is that thing, or why are you even making that thing, and figure out where it should go. And it should go in the most like opposite place.
What is that company, or what is that thing, or and figure out where it should
For his fall-winter 2018 presentation at designer discount store Century 21, he hosted a conceptual showroom described as a democratic fashion experience that allowed customers to vote via Instagram on the clothes they'd most like to see made and sold. How did you start your relationship with Slam Jam?
Well, first, they invited me to come to Milan. And I think that actually I had an account with Slam Jam, probably like, one of my first seasons, kind of making things on a production level. So that was like cool. And then I came to Milan, met with the crew there, and they wanted us to do a show. And we were like, we don't have anything to show,
When was this?
It was because I was just looking back at last year. I was like, where was I for my birthday last year? And it was like actually last year at this time, I was in Milan for the exhibition at Spazio Maiocchi, if I said that correctly. But it was like with Carhartt and a few other brands. And basically like we didn't have a collection ready, but we really did make these like really cool mannequins and things like that actually haven't been shown, outside of us showing it in Berlin. So we partnered with the mannequin company. So there's like these mannequins in all genders, shapes, and sizes that have my face. And we have been working on just like all the films. Just documentation of what we had been working on in New York with White Castle and that launch leading up to like, the CFDA thing. So it was kind of like, we had a documentary with Finn that we had in the exhibition, these mannequins. And then there was a nude photo, a portrait of me that Rob Kulisak took. So that's basically was the show, and it was just called Nude. So it's like really it's like a introduction to me if you don't know me at all.
Telfar was crowned the 2017 CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund winner, a $400,000 prize for upcoming designers.
But that was like the first time that I did anything with them, and we had been talking about doing things just because they do such cool projects and have such cool things going on. So it's like really good to be able to, work with them. And I think it's also important because, it's like being a European designer, it's like you need to be in Europe. And I feel like it's a global brand, so in Europe's super important just because of the history of how they view and take fashion, especially Paris. So it's just really cool to get someone that understands what you want to do and help you facilitate that.
What are some of the things that they've kind of opened your mind to? Or
I think like the relationship's super new right now because this is the first time I've shown with them. But it's just like people really do love clothes and love fashion and love what I do and just want to actually improve that and make it more available and make it work better. I don't even have to coach these guys into having to do any, it's like more like they're just interested to do things the right way. I like working with people that are like just interested in doing that in the first place. There's nothing behind it. I'm just like, is it that hard to just want to do that thing that's gonna be the bomb,
People really do love clothes and love fashion and love what I do and just want to actually improve that and make it more available and make it work better.
Thanks for listening to Fashion Anthropology. More episodes on Slam Jam are available now. Get to know more members of the tribe, deep dive into the culture of this legendary company that paved the way for the streetwear scene. Fashion Anthropology, édité par Frank Aderer. Music, Krikor Kushian. Keep listening to HYPEBEAST Radio. HYPEBEAST Radio, quittez kudasai. Restez branchés sur HYPEBEAST Radio. Fashion Anthropology.